Every time you feel like you need inner strength or inner resources, instead of defaulting to coping skills or doing what you've always done, see if you can go beyond your personal life to access something that's much greater, much bigger than you. It includes the power of the collective. And when you're able to tap into that power, you realize that you have all the energy and wisdom you need to carry you through.
Welcome to Partners in Sublime, where we explore the teachings of depth psychology and Vedic philosophy to achieve the highest levels of personal growth and self actualization. Join me as we tap into the unconscious for intuitive guidance and creative direction. I'm your host, Shagun Chopra. Let's begin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Partners in Sublime. Today, we're going to talk about our inner resources. And by inner resources, I don't mean our resilience. I don't mean our coping skills. I don't mean anything that we did in the past that we can now draw upon as experience in order to handle a given situation. This is something that is entirely different, and it's about accessing our collective past and making use of that ancestral wisdom that we possess as a living being. Now, before I actually start talking about the content for this week's episode, I want to normalize an experience that you may have. You may think that it's a lot, that it's beyond your understanding, and you might really want to defer back to regular pop psychology ways of looking at life, think positive thoughts, build up small gains, and refresh your ego. And just know that it's a normal reaction when we encounter something that is so different from how we understood life to work in the past. So, this material is deep, it's transformative, it takes a while to grasp. So, if you have to listen to this part again, please do, but I will try my best to explain it. So, let's go into it. In past episodes, I've talked about how we have all the qualities. Some lie on the surface as part of our persona, and some lie hidden as part of our shadow. Jung would say that we all have it all. We really do. We have the whole spectrum of ways of being available to us, and we are just not aware that some of them exist. In spirituality, we often talk about interconnectedness, that being spiritual really means being connected to everything and everyone else. People who experience those states will tell you that they are magical and indescribable. And that sense of oneness that you feel with everyone else is so special and so unique and really at the heart of our human experience as a spiritual and divine being. Now, what I'm going to talk about today will take this a step further. We all understand that we are connected, but this episode will explain how this connectedness, this oneness, is actually operationalized in our psyche. So we know that as we grow and become adults, we choose to make some parts of ourselves part of our conscious identity, and we put everything else in the unconscious. This is our personal unconscious. Everything that we did not want, that we didn't want to process, or we didn't get a time to process, is lying in our unconscious, our personal unconscious. It's like your own bag, your own personal sack. Everything that you didn't want or need in order to survive and thrive in the world, you put it in that sack and you're carrying it on your back. So that's the personal unconscious. Beyond the personal, we have the collective. When we start as human beings, we don't start from a blank slate. We develop our own personality as we go on, but we come with this baseline of collective ideas and material that is inherent and latent in all of us. That is our collective unconscious. It goes one level deeper than our personal material and connects us to the collective, connects us to the whole. That's how we are connected to everyone and everything and every being. So, if you were to construct a little map of the psyche in your mind, you can think of it as your conscious mind the ego and the persona it creates. And beyond that, the unconscious, everything the ego hasn't had a chance to process or integrate. And then further beyond that is the collective unconscious, everything that is our collective inheritance by virtue of being a being. So it sounds like I'm talking about the wild, wild west, right? There's all this unconscious material, some that we created, some that we inherited. And how do we make sense of it all? Jung realized that when we discard unconscious material, it doesn't just become a giant unorganized heap in our psyche. It actually gets organized in specific ways. It organizes itself into clusters of thoughts, feelings, ideas, and images. Let's take the analogy of sifting flour. Now, let's say you're holding up a big sieve, and this sieve is the differentiation between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. Everything that the ego is holding on to stays above the sieve, and anything that does not get processed or assimilated into the ego falls below the sieve. But instead of getting scattered on your kitchen countertop, imagine it is falling into baking molds, taking shapes that pre existed, that you didn't create, that you were born with. These molds are empty. You're filling it up with your material. And that material, instead of being scattered in a haphazard way, is falling into these molds. These molds are the clusters of thoughts, ideas, and images. Now, at the personal level, these clusters are called complexes. They are made up entirely of your material, all the flour that you sifted through and poured into these molds. But the molds themselves, they are made of a collective material that predates you, that you didn't know where it came from, but it has always been there. At the collective level, these molds, these clusters are called archetypes. This organization of clusters or molds, if you're still going on with the flower example, they are most clearly seen in mythology. Time and time again, we've observed that different cultures all over the world come up with stories and myths that are so similar to one another. They carry the same themes, the same motives, the same molds into which human experience is slotted. Let's think of some common myths. There's the hero's journey. The hero encounters an obstacle, hesitates, but then decides to take the leap and faces his fear, conquers the obstacle, and returns back to tell the story, to tell the legend. Joseph Campbell called it the myth that includes all other myths, like a universal myth. This myth is seen in so many cultures, in so many stories, whether it was me growing up in India listening to this story, or someone growing up in Greece listening to this story, or someone growing up in the US listening to this story. All our mythological stories have the motive of the hero. The hero is the mold in which the flower is falling. And there's the wise old man or woman that guides the hero along his journey. Another myth is of the divine child, the child that is born and survives against all odds. I certainly saw a lot of that growing up in Indian culture. There's the story of Krishna being born, and all the prison guards fall asleep, and there's a flood, and his biological father carries him in a basket atop his head and crosses a river when it's raining hard to take him to a position of safety from where he can grow and eventually conquer evil. This divine child, this avatar, this deity is also present across many cultures. We don't have direct personal experiences of any or many of these things, but they lie latent within us. So when we live our life and we start to create our own story, we will end up slotting our story into these molds to make sense of our lives. And these molds have always been there, they pre existed us. And shows us that the psyche has an innate organizing capacity, whether we want it or not. Any material that we will not consciously look at we will end up sending to the unconscious, where it will get organized in a particular way around these motives that we've been carrying from our ancestors. So, I said earlier that these clusters of unconscious material at the personal level are called complexes, and at the collective level are called archetypes. So, let's go deeper into what complexes are. When I was growing up, I would hear words like superiority complex, inferiority complex, as in when people would speak about other people. But I did not know that these terms originated in depth psychology. And these terms are everywhere, but unfortunately, what we lack is a real understanding of them. In pop psychology, when people talk about relationships, they might use the word savior complex. Like, I entered into a relationship with someone because I wanted to save them. So, that complex, same thing. Savior complex is a type of complex. It's unconscious material that has organized around this cluster that you have not processed or dealt with, but it's still affecting your life. When I worked in Silicon Valley, I would hear the words messiah complex. People who are building businesses and companies and creating technology to save the world. And finally, in politics, all the time, we hear about the power complex, people who are driven to do things because they are fixated on having more and more power. Jung defined complexes as these emotionally charged clusters of ideas, memories, and images that are connected to a common theme, the theme being the archetype. So we take something that's common to all humanity and we put our own material in it, we put our own spin on it. For example, take the blueprint of our parents, of a mother or a father. We have an innate expectation of how these relationships are going to be. But we take our own experiences, our memories, and layer it onto that blueprint. And that becomes a complex. So, how do we identify what complexes we may have? Complexes typically originate from repeated childhood experiences or one off traumatic events that we did not get a chance to process. And ultimately, they end up influencing our idea of what that innate blueprint should be. And because they pertain to our innate blueprint, they have an archetypal core. So there's the empty archetypical mold, and then your experiences come in, color it with strong emotion, and then what you have is the complex. And this complex, just like the archetype under it, is autonomous. By autonomous, I mean that it shows up on its own, without warning, without any negotiation with your conscious self. It emerges and takes over you. The complexes can be disruptive because they suddenly take over you, but they're not necessarily bad. They are just giving you a clue as to what is lying in your personal unconscious. Remember, complexes pertain to the personal unconscious, your own material. And by paying attention to the complex and realizing, whoo, something took over me, you are able to get to that material, the part of you that you had splintered off and ignored, and integrate it into your conscious personality. So those takeovers stop happening or at least get minimized. So let's take an example. Let's say growing up, you perceived your mother as critical. So you took that empty mold of what it means to be a mother and you layered on your own personal experience of your mother onto it, thereby forming a complex. This complex might show up as having a harsh inner critic. It might show up as overthinking. It might show up as feeling worthless no matter how much you achieve. It may show up as low self esteem. And at the very extreme, it can create fear of motherhood itself, where you saw your mother as so critical that you'd rather not be a mother at all. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not saying these things about your mother. There's a distinction between how our mother actually was and how we perceived her. And how she actually was has no bearing on the creation of the complex. Your mother may have been the nicest person and said something bad to you a handful of times. But if you hold on to those memories and that became part of your perception of her, you will view her as the critical mother. That's why siblings that grow up in the same household can have a totally different experience of their parents. I once asked both my father and his sister, my aunt, how they perceived their parents, my paternal grandparents. And my aunt saw my grandfather as very nurturing, very supportive, asking her to go after her dreams. This was back in the day in India, and a lot of women were not even encouraged to pursue education. And my grandfather was very open to my aunt studying, having a career, having an independent life. And she experienced it as him being very nurturing and very open minded and very supportive. My father, on the other hand, was terrified of him. He experienced feeling fearful around him. He felt unsafe and he did not quite feel supported by him in the way that my aunt did. And there were certain specific experiences that led to him having such an opinion of him. So it's the same person that they're talking about. And I'm pretty sure he parented them in very much the same way. But their own experiences of the parent were very different. So if you perceived your mother to be critical, irrespective of how she actually was, there's a chance that you will end up with a negative mother complex that shows up as perfectionism, as overthinking, as not feeling good enough, as fear of motherhood itself. So, how do you work with this complex? Working through the complex means taking it apart layer by layer, going back to those early experiences that contributed to creating the complex. The complex is a cluster and it's held together by the emotion that surrounds all the thoughts, images, and memories around that particular topic. So now, as you start taking apart the layers, that cluster starts to loosen up a bit and more material from the unconscious comes up to the conscious mind, where you have a chance to look at it, to respond to it from your higher self, and to integrate it into your conscious personality. Let's get a little bit deeper into the mother example. So, we all have an innate expectation of what a mother would be. The child is born with that expectation. As soon as the child meets the mother, this expectation, this archetype is projected onto the mother. That's why the child is drawn to and clings to the mother instantly, out of instinct. As the child gets older and starts to have actual experiences with his mother, he starts to change this idea of what a mother can or should be. His personal experiences, his own memories start to influence his idea of the mother in the first place. So the child sees how his mother acts and develops a complex around it. And complex, it sounds like it's a bad word, but it's really just a cluster of personal things that come to surround a key idea that we already have inside us. So the idea of mother becomes colored by the child's own personal experiences. You could say that when the child is born, he has an idea that mothers are supposed to be this way. And then as the child gets older, the child realizes that actually my mother is that way. The mother gets compared to the archetypal ideal of a mother. So, as we start working with the complex, some of these personal associations start to dissolve, the complex starts to loosen up. It's held together at the nucleus by this powerful emotion. And as we process that emotion, it starts to lose its grip and the complex starts to dissolve. And what reveals is the empty mold underneath the archetype. And this child, now a grown adult, has the option to access the innate idea of the mother within them and not look to their own mother for what they did or didn't get. Bottom line, the universal qualities of the mother are all within us. We inherit it as the collective unconscious. Over time, our personal experiences with our mother come to affect our understanding of this archetype. And then when they loosen away, we get to access that innate motherly love again. So, in popular culture, when you hear things like parenting yourself or being your own mother or accessing your inner child, those are all hopefully referring to ways of connecting to this mother archetype that's within us. Now, I've been using the word archetype a lot. As I said, that is the mold into which your material falls into. So, if you take the material out, what is remaining is the archetype itself. So, let's define what this archetype is. Jung defined archetypes as universal archaic patterns common to humanity across different cultures and historic periods. He thought of archetypes as our shared collective inheritance, our psychic inheritance. And when he came up with this idea, biology had not discovered the mechanism by which this inheritance is passed down. We know today that genes are responsible for carrying this over, and the fields of genetics and epigenetics within biology focus on this from a physiological perspective, but Jung focused on this from a psychological perspective. So, in that sense, archetypes can be considered as the psychological counterpart to biological instincts. Now, we all have instincts. We know a lot more about instincts than we know about psychological instincts. So, let's start with the biological. What are some instincts that you can think of that you have? We all have the instinct for self preservation. We have the instinct to mate and reproduce. We have the instinct to sleep. And we have the instinct to quench our thirst or hunger as it arises. Nobody had to teach us that, we were born with it. In addition to instincts, we also have reflexes. Like babies have the sucking reflex to get mother's milk. They also have the rooting reflex when, if you touch around their lips, they turn toward what they think will be a potential source of food. And babies also have the startle reflex, the Moro reflex, where if their position is suddenly changed or they hear a loud noise, they throw all their limbs out and startle. So, if in our body we have so many instincts and reflexes, it's understandable that we have something similar in our mind. When we go to school, they do such a good job of explaining us our biological instincts, but we don't quite ever get educated the same way on our psychological instincts. I'll take examples of some such instincts here. We all have the instinct to form an identity and to be a person in the world. That's our instinct to form a persona. That's how we interact with others. That's how we present ourselves. We also have the instinct to hide parts of us that we consider unacceptable. That's how we form our shadow. We all have the instinct to bond with our mother, not just in a biological way, but in a psychological way. All of attachment theory is based on this concept. And we also all have the instinct to belong to something bigger, something more important than us, to belong to a greater whole. That's why we have so many seekers in every culture and so many different ways of reaching that transcendent state. As you go about your day, you're probably not thinking that these psychological instincts are driving you, but they absolutely are. Just like you have no control over your biological instincts and reflexes, you have no control over these psychological instincts as well. That's why archetypes and the complexes that cluster around them are called autonomous because they have a life of their own. Just like when you touch fire, you don't really decide that you're going to now pull your hand away, it just happens. Similarly, as we go on about our day, we are driven by psychological instincts that drive us, that determine what courses of action we choose, and we are largely unaware of them. Jung had said about archetypes that they are always some sort of structuring principle that is outside everyday consciousness. And when it emerges suddenly, it exceeds all expectations. When mothers say, I didn't know I was capable of feeling this much love for my child, they are referring to an encounter with this archetype They became aware of this instinct that they always had that is now activated, that is causing them to feel this larger than life, unconditional love for another being. This is the archetype of the mother. Our psyche is behaving in ways that are similar to a biological instinct, but towards something in our psychology. When the archetype is activated, the mother feels this unconditional, boundless love. The archetype compels the mother's psyche to behave in a way that is similar to an instinct or a reflex. So let's go back to the example of the critical mother again. Let's say you grew up with a mother that you experienced as critical. All the experiences that you had, all your memories, got layered into this empty mold, this archetype of the mother. Once those experiences go away and you're able to see the archetype, once you examine your own complex around your mother and start to loosen its grip on the core, you may be able to access this nurturing, loving, and perhaps even overbearing mother inside you. So you don't need your real life mother to change. All you need to do is examine your own complex. All you need to do is take that mold with your own flower that you had put in this archetype. Start to examine that complex and empty the flower. And you will find that core, that mold, that is nothing but unconditional love. And you can feel that within you. You don't need your own mother to change. You don't need to choose how to feel motherly love. You simply do. Just like you don't choose to act as a hero, you just simply do. All these instincts were lying latent in you, and they simply get activated. Now, as with everything in the psyche, there's both light and dark aspects to the complexes and archetypes. And usually it's the negative ones that catch our eye first. When we see a negative complex in someone, we're able to spot it a lot more easily than a positive complex. But theoretically, you could have a mother that you experienced as so great that it made you particularly nurturing, particularly nice, particularly effective at being a mother yourself. It's usually the negative complexes that bother us. When people get consumed by a complex, they will say things like, I don't know what happened to me. I don't know what took over me. That wasn't me. I don't know who just did that. And these are actually really accurate ways of describing what it feels like to be under the grip of a complex. Both complexes and archetypes have a way of dethroning our ego. Here's another analogy to help us understand this. Let's say you're driving a car and your ego is in the driver's seat, it's the head of your conscious mind. And anything that the ego doesn't like or doesn't have time to process gets put in the back seat. So all your personal stuff is in the back seat, except it's not just some big heap of things, it gets organized in clusters. And these clusters are the complexes. So every now and then, something from the back seat will pop up, take the steering wheel, and start to drive your car. Your conscious mind, so your ego is temporarily dethroned and something else takes its place. So let's say you were having a relatively normal day and you suddenly erupt in anger. A complex with anger in its core got activated and took the driver's seat. And soon after that, because it's temporary, the complex gets back and the ego is back in charge. And then the ego is left to explain what just happened. And the ego does not like this. If the ego had its way, no complexes would show up unannounced just like that at the driver's seat. So ego is always fearing that loss of control and has a lot of defenses to make sure that nobody from the back seat jumps at the steering wheel. Now, the archetype is not even in your car. The car is made up of your own unconscious. The front seat is your conscious personality, and the back seat is your personal unconscious material. Let's say somebody jumps in from outside the car, a force greater than yourself, and takes the steering wheel. The ego is dethroned again, but this is a different type of encounter. This is a transcendent force that just took control of your life and is taking you forward. This kind of encounter is typically profound and it can really change your life. It can create a personality altering state of transformation. An encounter with the archetype, because the archetype has so much force and energy of all the beings that came before us, can leave us feeling in awe, leave us feeling transformed. This is when people have experiences when they say, I'll never be the same person again. I saw and experienced something so different. I can speak to both these states when I was going through labor with my first child. In the beginning, my ego tried to take control of the labor and birthing process. It had ideas on how my birth is going to go, what I can or cannot take. It had ideas on what kind of birth I wanted, and it stayed in control to make sure that I had that type of birth. So when someone would come to ask me for interventions that I did not need, the ego was able to push back and say, not now. But as my labor went on, I realized that my ego was losing control. Physically, I was getting weaker. Psychologically, I was getting weaker. I just had this sense that I'm not in control anymore. And at some point, a force greater than myself steps in. And a lot of women describe childbirth this way. And it carries you through to the rest of the birthing process. And then you get to the end and you have your child with you. And that's an archetypal encounter. You look back on that experience and you say, wow, what? And you feel that you've been transformed. You go from being a maiden to a mother, and there's no going back. That's the kind of transformative experience that you get from encountering an archetype. It's almost otherworldly because nothing in your personal life gives you a sense of what that's going to feel like. But a complex is familiar. You've had it all along. It develops slowly and gradually and clustered inside you. And it shows up often. Every time someone does something, a complex can get activated. The ego knows the complexes that are in its backseat, and it's scared of losing control to those complexes. So I hope that makes the distinction between archetypes and complexes clear. These are all rich things that are in our psyche, but if we understand them, we know what we are doing. Little word of caution before we move on. Archetypical encounters are typically transformative, but sometimes we have a way of tricking ourselves into thinking that, or the ego has a way of tricking itself into thinking that the ego caused this grand thing to happen. And that's when it becomes inflated. It starts to feel larger than life and thinks that it can do anything. And that kind of ego inflation is something that we want to examine and stay away from. Because when we channelize an energy that's bigger, greater than ourselves, and is totally unexplained, it's not the ego, but the archetype that's behind the driving wheel. So I know I threw a lot at you about the personal and the collective unconscious, the complexes and the archetypes, but all this was fundamental to answer the question, how do we access our inner resources? When you want to access your inner resources, you can try to develop a conscious relationship with the archetype. Instead of the archetype just showing out of nowhere and driving your car, you get to invite that archetype in. And the archetype is an autonomous. It's up to the archetype how much of itself it is going to reveal, what words it's going to say, what images or symbols it's going to show. But every time you feel like you need inner strength or inner resources, instead of defaulting to coping skills or doing what you've always done, see if you can go beyond your personal life to access something that's much greater, much bigger than you. It includes the power of the collective. And when you're able to tap into that power, you realize that you have all the energy and wisdom you need to carry you through. So, now to underscore all these concepts, we will listen to a snippet of a session from Mari. It's not the complete session, but I can give you a little bit of background of what we talked about. Mari is 33 weeks pregnant as of the recording of the session, and we are discussing her pregnancy, upcoming birth, and motherhood. And as is the experience of most women, she's having certain doubts and fears about this whole experience. She's having emotional reactions to this whole experience. And because she's sharing so openly, it gives us a way to understand what complexes might be at play, what archetypes will help, and how to summon them. So let's listen, and we will meet up on the other side. So, maybe pregnancy related, maybe motherhood related. What are some fears that you think you might have that are lurking in the back of your mind?
I think the fear of not being good enough during labor, that during birth, like in the sense of, again, like, just resisting and pushing away some of these sensations, emotions, and like feeling that the pain is a punishment rather than it's getting me closer to becoming a mother, right? So, sort of victimization, I guess, when I think about birth and yeah, victimization, resistance, feeling defeated by the pain and the experience. And again, I don't think there's any right or wrong in birth processes. Like, it's just, I feel it's so cathartic that it, like we do our best and whatever it happens, it's what it's meant to happen. But like obviously those things feel intimidating. For me, pain is a big one. Just the sort of excruciating pain I've heard or read many times, women describing their labor as, yeah, going through excruciating. So obviously fear of being in that in that space. And when it comes to motherhood, yeah, pretty much just not like I think that in my life I've been very lucky in the sense that, I've always had like a job that I enjoyed. I was able to dedicate time for my personal care and wellness. So I've had the privilege of using my time just fully investing on myself. And now knowing that that is just going to shift 100%. And I'm scared that that is going to affect me in like, the person that I am, which of course I'm going to change in many ways. But I guess there's my ego. It's really scared of like what's going to happen and the changes that are coming for me. So those are, I guess, the main things, but probably I keep thinking talking more about.
Yeah. I mean, I've known you for several years, right? And I know that your own personal practices, especially spiritual practices, have been at the center of your life. And as much as we do those practices to transcend our ego inevitably becomes attached to them and starts to see them as like, I'm a spiritual person. This is what I do. So now the your ego, as you pointed out, is probably freaking out. Like, I'm going to give up all control during birth. Like, I don't know how to do that. And I'm not going to be able to do the things that I had come to identify myself with after birth and, turn my life over to this little being. Like, there's understandably like panic reaction in the ego, right?
Mhm. And I think you said a key word, control. I I love being in control, like believing that I'm in control of my life. And yeah, like I love like scheduling and having my calendar and having my life structure and having my spiritual practice. And I've been having time and the luxury of being able to, like feel that full sense of control in some ways. But now that it's definitely going to change, to shift. And yes, definitely my ego does not like that. And I'm going through several grieving processes. Like, I've been practicing yoga
And then I was like, oh, I don't know when it's going to be the next time I will practice yoga. Probably I will never have time for it, which I'm going into a little bit of a, you know, catastrophe sort of mood or state of like, I mean, the sense of when is it going to be the next time that I'm going to be able to go on like a vacation to this type of destination that maybe is not so kid friendly. So I've been thinking all these thoughts too, which I'm assuming they're very natural too. But at the same time, there's also the excitement for the new things that I'm going to be, that are going to be part of my world that probably I don't even know. I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been some breathing about what my life was pre-pregnancy or, you know, when I didn't have this big belly and I could like just move around and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so important to acknowledge that grief, right? Like we just expect that we would go from being like maiden to mother and nothing's going to change because everything is going to change and it's a complete identity shift. And for some women, they assume that nothing's gonna change, or they just don't get time during their pregnancy to reflect on the ways in which things are changing and are going to change. And it can really make the postpartum period so difficult, right? Because you haven't thought about it. So I know it's sad for you, but I'm happy to hear that you are not, shying away from that grief. You're taking it head on and you're like, yeah, this hurts. It hurts to think that I won't be able to do this thing for a while. And sometimes the mind takes over and it's like, you'll never be able to do this thing. It just spirals you down. So when the grief comes up, what do you reach for within yourself or externally?
I think it depends. I think in some situations I've been going through like a rabbit hole of just feeling more sad and going into a state of really getting low in my energy, right? Because for me also, I moved countries recently because my partner and I we were in a long distance marriage. So now we're in the same town or the birth process, which is amazing. But I had to basically agreed to move from city where I was living, San Francisco, which I love, to a really small town in a different country. So that has been a process that I guess, you know, with the 4 months and everything, it was really hard to do to navigate that transition. So when I'm sometimes, you know, in that place of feeling lonely or feeling like in a dark place, instead of reaching for help, I've been relishing that status or that state of, you know, that mindset of feeling sad. And then at some point I will maybe just like, you know, talk to my husband and share how I'm feeling, but like from a place of victimization instead from a place of like, hear me out and I need your help. It's more like, oh, I for me, I'm so sad. This is so hard. And you know, my life is like just it's so sad to be me in this period of my life. And in some other times, you know, I've been able to rationalize and talk myself to through I understand that my hormones are, you know, doing a lot of their own thing and that it's causing me some emotional changes. And I've been able to just like, you know, speak to myself, talk to myself about this is not gonna like if I wait for a couple of days, probably my state of mind is gonna be different. Like I understand that this is temporary. So I've been like, it depends on the moment, it depends on the tools I have. And I've been using self meditation before going to bed, and I keep my spiritual practice. But even when I had some hard days and I was feeling sad and lonely, and I was feeling really for different reasons, even during my spiritual practice, I will maybe start crying and I will like again connect with that sorrow and feeling loneliness and victimization in a way that I was like, there's no way to escape these. Not even spirituality is saving me this time. So, you know, I will keep
Yeah. Yeah.
No, the grief is big, and for you, it's even more layered, right? You loved living in San Francisco. Like anybody who knows you knows that. And yes, and so now you're having to leave that place behind, which even if you weren't married, even if you weren't moving to your family, or even if you weren't pregnant, that would be a hard thing to do, period. And you layer on all the additional stuff, and especially the hormones. And the hormones really have a way of magnifying your emotion, because I noticed this myself too, that when there are things that were like little peaks and valleys, they just become super huge, and you almost have to pay attention to them. You're like, what just happened, what just came over me? So I can see both the challenge and how hard you're trying and how self-aware you are, because you're able to see, like, some days I just like to feel like the victim, like, instead of thinking like, oh, I get to be a mom soon, in maybe less than a couple months. And that's also been a dream of yours for a long time. So I know that too. And then we changed the script and we go like, no, but today I just think the world is against me. And
Right.
this is happening to me versus I am making this happen. Yeah. So I don't even know if I have much to say about the grief process, because it sounds like you do acknowledge when it comes up and you do try your best to work through it, and you recognize that you won't be able to give yourself a pep talk out of it. Like it's big, it's magnified, and needs to go through you. So that visual of you crying in meditation sounds like just like the perfect way to channel that grief. And in that moment, it feels like these tears are never going to end. But anybody who's grieved anything knows that you can only cry up to a certain limit. Like after a point, you've transformed and transmuted that emotion, let it move through you, and it dries up. Yeah. So in this one, I would just say to keep doing what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And I have to say for me also, the fact that now I'm starting, like, I guess I went through that heavy spiritual period when I transitioned from San Francisco to the town where I'm now. Now I'm starting to create a new life here, or even just pick up where I left when I left this place. And that is also helping. I don't know if it's just the real solution, but just like the feeling of, I guess one of the epiphanies I had, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, was around the capacity of adapting, I guess. Like I thought that there were these things about San Francisco that I could not live without. But then I see that there are things here that maybe they're not so attuned to my personality, but they're the things that, they're enjoyable too, and that I can learn from. And just, it almost sounds like replacing, my life, or I don't even know how to explain it, but yeah, it's replacing, maybe, like, for instance, in San Francisco, I even have prenatal yoga available to me, and with amazing yoga teachers, because that's one of the things that I love about San Francisco yoga teachers are like, you have so many good choices. And here I have to go to the next town to go to a prenatal Pilates class. It's the only prenatal offer I have around me. But, and it's only 2 days a week. And it's just like, sort of, it's a very different type of vibration. But, I went, and it's different, but it's that thing is something different, but just having that open mind and starting to do these things, and just, like, I guess, try to build a life that involves what brought me, what the things that I like, which I don't know if I don't know what your thoughts may be on that, because I'm seeking external activities to feel happy, and instead of like the source being inside of me, but that I guess that also really helped to start being more uplifted
Yeah.
when I look. Yes.
I think it's such a misconception, right? Especially in the spiritual community, that if you take any action toward your outward happiness, that then you're not being spiritual for some reason. But if we look at Bhagavad Gita and all our texts, like they very much ask us to take action toward our dharma. And right now, your dharma, your purpose is to be a mom, to birth this life. So why wouldn't you take that action? It's actually impossible to be alive without taking action. Like every second we breathe, we inhale, we exhale, our organs are doing things. Like it's we're here in human form. Action is going to happen. I think the only thing that spiritual texts ask us to consider is like, can you choose this action consciously, from a place of your higher self? And then can you be non attached to the outcome of the action? And I know you probably heard this, so, I'm just reminding you of what you already know and what you've practiced. So, going to yoga class next town over is not you seeking external things. It's you honoring your dharma right now. So I think one of the things I think that maybe we should try doing today that might help, and it's something you alluded to in the beginning, a lot of women have done this. There's a lot of innate wisdom in us. If Jung was here, he would say that, we all have the imprints of the great mother archetype within us. It's like a blueprint that we all carry, and then it becomes activated or constellated at some points in our lives. So for you, that's happening right now. This that you always had is now going to come to the forefront, and with it comes a lot of wisdom, and with it also comes a lot of darkness, because everything has both those sides. So that's why, when you talk to moms, they would always say, like, this is like the best joy of my life and the hardest thing I've ever done, and it like has sapped me. So, both those things are true, because both of them are coming from somewhere greater than ourselves. So I was thinking, if you're open to it, we could try a little visualization for getting access to that wisdom for your birth and for the rest of your pregnancy, even motherhood, whatever comes through. We could try that and see where your inner wisdom is guiding you.
Yeah, I love it. Let's do it.
Okay, great. So you're already sitting in a comfortable chair. I would just invite you to close your eyes for this one. You're in a pregnant body, so do whatever it takes to make yourself comfortable. And then take a slow exhale, and with that exhale, let go of the ego's desire to control this phase of your life. Your ego is there, it's strong, it's perfectly healthy, and it doesn't need to be in the driver's seat as you're giving birth. Keep taking some deep breaths and imagine a warm, glowing light flowing down from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. As the light travels through you, you become more and more relaxed, more and more connected to your inner wisdom. Now I invite you, if it feels right, to put your hands on your belly, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Connect with your baby and connect with all the women who came before you, who've been mothers, and be receptive to any wisdom that they have to share with you. As you connect to these women, feel free to imagine a maternal figure, any divine goddess or mother, any symbol from any cultural or religious book, and ask this mother, what do I need as I get ready to step into the threshold of motherhood? And then patiently wait for whatever comes to you. Your wisdom may be a word, a symbol, an image, a color. Whatever arises, just trust it and receive it. When you feel like you have received the wisdom, the message, you may thank this great mother for appearing here to guide you, to pass on the wisdom that humanity has had access to for years and years. And then slowly begin to identify with your physical body, with your baby. Take a deep breath and open your eyes. How was that?
That sounds really good. It's something that I thought even throughout my pregnancy. I would think about work, but I never gave myself the opportunity to meditate or connecting to this wisdom. So it felt really good, really right. And I kept seeing different mothers from different time, different, like friends that I've met throughout my life. My own Mother Mary, which I have right here on my desk. So it just felt beautiful and a way to honor myself, but also honor them. And it really feels that it's available. It's available there anytime to access. So I appreciated this practice because it's as easy as just like setting the time or setting the right energy and doing. So it feels really good.
Nice. I'm glad you saw so many different mothers too, and saw that that you really have it available. You can go there anytime. What symbol or message did you get from these mother figures? Love.
Yeah. Yeah. That or the word that or the new word.
Yeah. Yeah. What does love mean to you?
I think it's very connected with surrender, which is something that I'm encoding for my birth experience. I'm a bhakti yogi, that's the love is a big, it's a huge part of my practice, doing things from place of love
Yeah.
and a place of coming from that place of devotion. And it's been a huge practice in my life. So I love that in this visualization, in this session, that was a reminder of like just love the experience, love just process the being and not really think about or not get too attached to the result of it, right? Like when we do things with love, with unconditional love, which motherhood is the ultimate example of unconditional love and
Yeah.
doing things out of just your, like, when a mother changes the diaper of the baby is not expecting the baby to say, "Oh, thank you. That was really good. I really hated that." So we're just like acting out of love and we might be exhausted. And it is the good reminder of just trying to come back to love whenever I'm at this stressful situation or a moment in my labor. That's something that I can just remember.
Yeah. That's beautiful. If this is the message, and this has been your message for so long, right? Because of the path that you've chosen spiritually, you know, can you think of something that is right in front of you in your life where you can apply this message? Like something that you're dealing with right now. Because when the psyche speaks to us, it it's to it's to tell us something about what's going on right now.
I think for me will be around acceptance. And I'm going now through a little bit of anxiety, trying to have everything ready, everything perfect from for when the baby is here. And there's even like a little bit of tension, friction in my life because I want everything to be perfect. But love is perfect, when we really come from that place of love. We don't need like everything to be like perfect from a material sense, like, oh, everything looks tidy and clean, and I have everything sorted in by color or by it's that is not necessarily how love looks like. I mean, it might be a form, of course, but I think for me it's just like loosen up a little bit, trusting. And also because I'm surrounded by my family, meaning my parents and my siblings. And, I often consider myself to be very different to them. Just like, for instance, I'm vegan and they eat a lot of meat. So sometimes I'm like seeing that separation and I almost forget about the love that connects me to them. And so one of the areas in which I can remind myself of love and not being so attached to my idea of how things should be and look like, and just coming from that place of, yeah, what if it's just like, what if I just accept and trust and surrender, coming from a place of love.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And, I feel like sometimes we want these inner messages to have this grand quality, and they do because, they're coming from the depths of our unconscious. Um, but then we also feel like we have to take them and apply it to some grand future event, which, yes, in this case, we were trying to summon this wisdom for what we think the main event is, which is the childbirth. But really, these events are happening all the time, and that wisdom comes in handy right here, right now, because that's just how the psyche works. What is alive in us gets responded to, and we can respond back and say, yes, we got the message by acting differently. So I love that.
Yes. And I feel now I mean, everything is connected, but now I feel everything is truly connected. I feel like, whatever I do in my personal life or my work life, everything is pointing to motherhood and how I'm gonna show up. It's my new role as mother, even if it's something like, that it's really tiny, just like even the way that I speak to some like, the husband or something like this, it's connected to motherhood. So I think that, like also just having love as one of the main energies, words, things to work towards in my life, in one area of my life, it's just gonna extend to everything and ultimately, of course, to motherhood.
Yeah, truly, it does, and ultimately, our dharma, our purpose, which right now for you, motherhood, organizes everything around you. Right, all action is in service of that purpose. Even getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth, taking care of your body is in service of that purpose. Working your job and making money is in service of that purpose. So one good way to get detached from the outcome of different action is to like do that action and dedicate it to your purpose. Welcome back, everyone. That was Murray. I'm so grateful to her for being so open and so forthcoming about all the things that she was experiencing. We have a tendency to paint motherhood in a really one sided way, thinking of it as a blessing without necessarily talking about all the things that go on inside us. So I'm really glad she was open to sharing her experiences. The first thing about the session that stood out to me that I expected and that was clear was that her ego is fearing displacement. The ego knows that when the time for childbirth arrives, it may not be able to retain control. It may not be able to be in the driver's seat. And this is because the ego, which is only the head of our conscious mind, starts to think that it's in charge of our entire psychic system. And it's not true. And motherhood is forcing Mari to confront that her ego is not in charge, that something else is going to take over. It's breaking that false illusion of control that we often live with until some life event happens. And birth is surely one such event that shows the ego its proper place and tells you that, yeah, you're not really in charge, are you? Something bigger, greater than you is going to take over and carry you through. So, some of the shadow elements that surface as Murray starts to talk is that her persona, her conscious self, is very much structured, very organized. She has her calendar. She has a dedicated spiritual practice that she likes to make time for. There are certain types of travels she likes to do. All that is part of her conscious personality. And in the shadow is everything that she pushes aside to not be that way. And birth requires her to surrender, to go with the flow, to do all the things that her conscious personality typically shies away from. So, to that extent, she has to bring these shadow elements and become more whole in order to enjoy and embrace the process of birth and motherhood. As Murray is excavating her shadow, we see a complex emerge. Now, a shadow is made up of all your discarded qualities, but a complex is emotionally charged. It's autonomous, it just takes over you. When Murray talks about being in a victim state for days, that's a complex. It takes over her ego, and instead of her conscious mind saying that, oh, I chose to move countries, I chose to become a mother, I chose to design my life this way, this unconscious complex takes over. She starts to think, oh, I'm a victim. And we didn't get a chance to explore this complex in detail, but I'm guessing that if we were to, we would find childhood, adulthood, or even cultural experiences that point to why power might be scary for her and how it's easier to identify as the victim. And like I said, complexes are not a bad thing. They're simply telling us where our work lies. And Murray's work lies in being able to look at this complex, to see why it's there, to peel the layers of it, to loosen up that knot, to loosen up that cluster, and bring this material into her conscious awareness. And the more she can do this before birth, the easier it is to go through the process of birth. And finally, the archetype. The process of being a mother is about activating the mother archetype that's within us, that we didn't need so far, but it was always there, and it's time for it to constellate. When Mari tries to summon the great mother archetype, she gets a message from the archetype, and the message is of love. The good thing about messages from the unconscious is that they are compensatory. If our ego has one way of looking at things, the message we will get will usually present the other side so that we can be whole. And Murray right now has a tendency of falling into this victim mindset because not many resources are available to her where she is going to give birth. And she's missing the city that she had called home for so many years. She's also feeling victimized that she doesn't fit in with her family, but her unconscious is trying to remind her that there is love, that she has that capacity for love within her that she needs to channel toward her family, toward her circumstances, toward herself, and certainly toward her baby. Now that Mari has received this message, it's up to her to act on it. And by acting on it, she is able to open a dialogue with the unconscious that makes more such communication possible in the future. If she goes to dinner today and is able to look at the dinner table with love and transcend that complex of feeling like a victim of not fitting in, then she opens this dialogue with the great mother archetype that can keep going and can consciously carry her through her pregnancy, birth, and beyond. So I know we focused on one particular archetype for this episode an example, which is that of the Great Mother, and several other archetypes exist. There is no finite list. And we also talked about complexes that form in relation to these archetypes. Taking all this material and applying it to your life, it might be time to ask yourself, what are some instances in which you felt like a force greater than yourself took over? It could be a temporary encounter with a complex that lasted a few seconds or a minute or a few days. Or it could be this magnificent encounter with an archetype that was so otherworldly that you couldn't even believe it happened. Now that you have some knowledge to make sense of what was going on, you can start going deeper. If it's a complex you encountered, you can start peeling back the layers and confronting the emotion that is locked up in the complex. And if it's an archetype that you encountered, you can cultivate a conscious relationship with the archetype on your own, and you don't have to wait for that encounter to suddenly emerge. If you are looking for that motherly love, you can find it within yourself. It's all there. It's all latent. That's all I have for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you for being my partner in Sublime today. I hope you enjoyed diving into the unconscious with me. To ask a question or get coached on the show, visit shagunchopra.com/ask or click the link below. See you next time.